Aren't you just awesome for clicking this video? Let us know where you're from and what time it is there. Just relax as we narrate some real-life, true horror stories for you to help you fall asleep. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means everything. Let's start. In the summer of 2017, my family moved into a small cul-de-sac on the edge of Haven Ridge, Washington. The neighborhood was quiet, the houses cookie-cutter neat, and our new backyard had a view of the dense woods just beyond the fence. It seemed perfect, at least until we met the Kellers. They lived 2 doors down. One evening, just a few weeks after we moved in, they invited us over for a backyard barbecue. My mom, dad, sister, and I walked over at around 8 p.m., greeted by the smoky scent of grilled meat and bug zapper pops. It was a modest gathering, just Mr. and Mrs. Keller and their teenage son, Micah. Mr. Keller was friendly enough, a wiry man with sunburned arms and a handshake like sandpaper. Mrs. Keller was polite but distant. Her eyes were always scanning, never resting on anyone's face for long. But it was Micah who unsettled me. He was pale, maybe 16, and didn't speak. Not once. He stood near the patio lights, eyes flickering constantly from the trees to the fence to the sky, never to the people around him. When our eyes accidentally met, he held the stare for far too long. I felt a cold pit form in my gut. There was no malice in his gaze, but something else, something hollow. I excused myself after dinner, saying I had homework, though school hadn't started yet. I just didn't want to be around Micah anymore. No one stopped me as I walked back across our lawns and shut myself inside. The next morning, I took my usual walk to Haven Ridge High, just 2 blocks away. About halfway there, I passed the Keller's house and glanced over my shoulder. That's when I saw someone dart behind a tree. I stopped walking, heart thudding, but told myself I was imagining things. A block later, I looked back again. This time, I saw Micah, half hidden behind a hedge in front of someone's house, staring directly at me. His long hair fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, and his eyes were locked onto mine. I didn't run. I just walked faster, trying to keep my breathing steady until I reached the school gates. That afternoon, I told my parents what happened. They went next door to speak with the Kellers. When they came back, I waited for an explanation, maybe something that would make it less creepy. My mom just said, "Mike is not like other kids. His parents say he's different." That was all. Different. Later that week, I sat on our patio to finish some reading. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the wooden fences and tree trunks. I happened to glance up at the only window on the 2nd floor of the Keller's house that faced our yard. Micah was sitting there. He wasn't doing anything, just watching, unmoving. His eyes were dark and unblinking, fixed on me. When he noticed I'd spotted him, he ducked out of sight. I jumped to my feet and ran inside, heart hammering in my chest. My parents told me again. His parents said not to worry. He's harmless. That night, after texting with friends, I finally laid down to sleep. My window was cracked open just a bit to let the cool summer air in. I was starting to drift when I heard it. A soft click, then the sound of the window sliding. I sat up. The window was opening. Slowly, carefully. I couldn't see anyone yet, but something told me not to wait. I screamed loud, panicked. My door burst open. My parents ran in, my dad flipping the light switch. That's when we saw him. Micah was inside my room. His foot had just touched the floor. In his hand, he held a long kitchen knife, the blade catching the light in a dull gleam. My mom screamed, grabbing my sister from the hallway. My dad lunged forward, yanking me toward the door as Micah stood frozen. We fled, rushing across the lawn barefoot to the Keller's porch, banging until Mr. Keller opened the door in confusion. Then chaos. My father shouted, dragging Mr. Keller with him back to our house. Inside, they found Micah sitting on the living room couch, knife across his lap, expression blank. Mr. Keller took the blade from his son's hands without a word and led him out of the house. The police came shortly after. My dad told them everything, demanded a restraining order. He was shaking with rage, promising the Kellers hell if they weren't out by the end of the week. Micah didn't come back. Whether he was taken somewhere for treatment or simply moved, we never found out. But his room stayed dark, the blinds always closed. For months afterward, I kept waking in the middle of the night, convinced I heard my window creaking open again. I bought a lock for it. Then I got a security camera. Then I stopped sleeping in that room altogether. Some nights, I still dream of that expressionless face, that knife gleaming in the dim yellow light. And I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't screamed? When my dad passed away, not only did he pass along his fishing boat, but he also passed along his love of fishing to me. The boat is a Rodman 1250, which has a decent-sized cabin, allowing me to go overnight deep-sea fishing. I usually fish off the coast of Bayfield and would sail for an hour out to sea, then stop and spend the rest of the day fishing. That's exactly what I did one Friday, taking my cousin Carter Bledsoe, done spending the night and fishing most of Friday and sailing back. So after sailing out to sea for about an hour, I picked the spot for us to stop and cast our lines. We brought a radio and tons of beers to make the time more pleasant. The sun started to set, and seeing the sun setting in the horizon with no visual intrusions was a beautiful sight, perhaps the last pleasant thing that would happen that night. By the time the sky was completely dark, we had already packed our stuff for the night and were inside the cabin playing cards and eating burgers. Mid-conversation, Carter stopped me and told me to listen. There was the sound of a boat motor in the distance. We left the cabin to look into the horizon, but with no moon, it was just too dark to see more than maybe 50 feet in front of us. But over the calm waves, we did hear a boat motor. Whoever was out there didn't have their lights on. The lights in my cabin were on, which was definitely enough for anyone to see us and avoid hitting us. We were expecting the sound of the other boat to sail away into the night. However, it seemed to circle us for a bit, then abruptly stopped. The motor just cut. There was nothing but the sound of the calm water splashing against the boat. Carter started acting a little paranoid. He thought we were being stalked. He wanted me to use the spotlight to look for where this boat could be. I didn't want to do that because that would be a bit obnoxious and obvious. To make him happy, though, I started to drive the boat for a few minutes away from the last direction we heard that engine stop. Maybe I did it because I was a little suspicious about it as well. After a solid 5 minutes of driving the boat in the opposite direction, I killed the motor and we went back inside the cabin to resume playing cards. It felt like only seconds after we sat down, we heard it again. This time I heard it first, and it sounded like the motor was being given much less gas. We went outside again, and at that instant the sound stopped. This time I agreed with Carter. Turning on the spotlight was a necessity. The spotlight only rotated 180 degrees, so I turned the boat a little to the right so that I could point the light out in the direction we heard the boat. The beam of light shot far into the horizon. I felt my heart racing as I slowly turned the light to point more to the right. And finally, I stopped when the light started to land on a boat floating not too far away from us. I turned the light off at once. I told Carter to turn the cabin lights off as well. I put the boat in full throttle and sped away from the area. I steered the boat for about 5 to 10 minutes before thinking it was enough. We hung out outside for a while to ensure we weren't followed again. When it seemed safe to do so, we went to sleep. However, I woke to a thumping coming from above my head, above the cabin. I looked over at Carter, sleeping on the couch. I whispered his name a few times to wake him up, and I pointed up at the ceiling. He looked up, then back at me with a look on his face telling me he heard the thumps. I opened the door to the deck and ran outside, and saw two men, one on the bow of my boat, the other on a boat floating directly next to mine. Carter came running out behind me. Both of the men slowly put their hands up in front of their faces and claimed they meant no harm. The one on my boat said they were simply almost out of gas and needed help. He said he was going to knock on my cabin door to ask for assistance. But in my head I was thinking, why was he on the bow of my boat? I very low-key flicked Carter's thigh to indicate to him that I was getting ready to do something rash. The guy stepped down from the front of the boat to the lower deck, right in front of Carter and me. He was significantly taller and bigger than us. He looked at me for a few moments and reached out his hand expecting a handshake without saying anything. I knew something was about to go down with these guys. And for all I knew, that could start with my shaking his hand. Instead of shaking his hand, I pushed the guy overboard into the water with all my strength. And I ran up the stairs to turn the boat on while I yelled at Carter to make sure they didn't get back on the boat. We were able to lose them in the night, for good this time. I didn't stop though. I kept going the full 2 hours straight back to the shore. We made it back to my dock, and we slept on my boat that night. The next morning we packed up and drove home. Strange things can happen out at sea in the dark, but I never anticipated anything like that. I don't know what those guys were planning on doing to us on my boat, but considering they had been making a point of stalking us, I know it was nothing good. A few years ago, I went on a Baltic Dream cruise with a few friends. It started out as a great little vacation. However, by the third day at sea, things started getting weird. After 2 days of eating constant sushi, I started to feel a little dizzy and lightheaded at times. My friends told me no more sushi, as it probably had something to do with that. But anyway, after a few drinks, I separated myself from my friends who were sitting in one of the ship's mini bars and started walking back to my room, because I really wasn't feeling too well. I took some weird lower deck around, back in the direction of my room, though since some of the bars were on the lowest public levels of the ship. I asked one of the maids in the hallway which way was the quickest to get to the certain section my room was in. The maid had a very thick accent, but I understood her to have said keep going straight, then make a left at the sign. So I did that. I came to a sign that I don't remember what it said, but it was a sign, so I turned left there. I was in some narrow hall with a tiled floor instead of carpeting. It didn't seem like the right way to go at all. It seemed more like an employees-only section. Still, I figured I'd give it a chance before turning back and continued down this narrow hall. I came to a corner, then looked to my right. And here is the creepiest hallway you could possibly find on the ship. Half the lights were out. One was flashing on and off. But at the end of this tiny hallway was someone standing facing the wall. My head started to hurt even more as I saw this. I had to rub my eyes to make sure what I was seeing was real. When I moved my hand away from my eyes, the person standing by the wall was now looking at me. Considering they were standing in the dark section of this hallway not lit up by lights, I couldn't really see much about their actual face, other than I knew they were looking at me. I turned and went back the direction I came. I walked back down the hall. The maid was gone now. However, with my head still killing me, I managed to get back to the lobby of this floor. And at that point, finding the elevators was easy. I made it back to my room easily at that point and crashed into bed. I was sure I had gotten food poisoning from the sushi because my stomach was also hurting along with my head. But anyway, I woke up at some odd hour in the night and I couldn't move. The only thing I could move were my eyes. I tried looking around the room, but my inability to move my head or sit in an upright position made seeing a lot of the room difficult. And I remember something seemed to appear in my peripheral vision. I turned my eyes to the opposite side of the room, and there was a figure facing the wall. As I looked at it, I wanted to scream or run, but I couldn't do anything. It was as real as could be, like I knew I was seeing it. The head of the figure turned around to face me, but all I saw was black. The body, the face, everything about this figure just looked black. The figure started to move closer to me. The most disturbing thing about it, though, is that as it moved towards me, it didn't move its limbs. It seemed to just slowly float towards me. The figure stopped over my bed, and now I could slightly see a face to it. And I recognized it as that person I saw earlier in the night in that hallway. I don't remember exactly how long that figure stood over my bed, but suddenly I saw its mouth open twice as wide as you'd expect to be humanly possible, and out came a deafeningly real scream. So loud that I think it woke me up completely from the sleep paralysis I was just in. The craziest thing I remember was the scream of this sleep paralysis figure feeding into the scream of my own voice I was finally able to make. I flicked on a light, and my friend, who was in the other bed, woke up asking what's wrong. I told him about the horrible experience I just had. He once again said I'd been eating way too much raw fish and it was messing with my head. My whole body was shaking and my voice was trembling. I went back to sleep and don't remember having another dream that night, but I still wonder if that person I saw in the hallway was real or not. Because I'm 90% sure that hallucination I had in my paralysis was also the realest, most horrific thing I'd ever seen. I live on the East Coast of the United States. Recently, I moved to Southport from Asheville, and I figured it would take a couple days to sail my boat down there to our new waterfront house. I didn't have any cars with a tow hitch to carry the boat, let alone a trailer to carry it with. So sailing it seemed like the best option. While my wife finished up moving the rest of the stuff to our new house, I kissed my family goodbye and set sail. None of them were really willing to come with me on this adventure. I didn't blame them. But anyway, I brought enough food and gas to last me the whole trip. The first day was a breeze. I got some sleep, then sailed for 10 hours the next day with breaks in between, of course. By nightfall, I went to bed in the cabin. Sleeping in a rocking boat isn't exactly the easiest thing to do, so I was up for hours rolling around on my sides, trying to find a comfortable position, trying to press my head firmly enough into the pillow, thinking it would hide the unbearable feeling of the boat rocking over the ocean surface. Eventually, I heard sounds coming from above my head that I could best describe as small thumps. It sounded like someone walking on my boat. I couldn't tell yet. With a medium-sized fishing boat floating out in the ocean, random sounds like creaks and thumps are going to be made. But these thumps were coming so rapidly and consistently, I started to get sick with the thought that someone out this far could be on my boat. I had to get out and look, but wanted to be quiet. So I opened the cabin door very slowly. But before I could even open it all the way, I heard a big splash in the water. It sounded to me like someone or something jumped into the water. I was honestly scared. I wasn't alone, even though it made no sense to me. I didn't want to go outside. I felt I should move the boat away from whoever or whatever was out there in the water. So I ran outside to the cockpit and started the boat engine. I gave the boat some gas and got myself the hell away from there immediately. I heard my boat bump into something in the water. Not something heavy enough to cause any kind of impact, but heavy enough to hear it and slightly feel the boat bump. I didn't see what it was because, to be honest, I wasn't paying attention to whatever was out in the water. Plus, the lights weren't on anyway. I sailed for a few hours in the deep night because I was wide awake anyway. When I started to get tired, I killed the motor and went back to bed. Emphasis on the word bed, not sleep, because even though I felt tired, I was still having trouble falling asleep. I figure half an hour passed, and I started hearing more thumps. This time the thumps seemed louder and more clear for some reason. In a split second, my heart started racing again. The thumps were consistent and deliberate sounding again. No way it was just boat noises. I felt like I was being followed by someone. I couldn't just sit there and hide in the cabin like this all night. I had to sum up the courage to go outside again. But when I checked, there was no one. The entire boat was empty. Was it my imagination? Were the sounds really just coming from the boat? I decided that must have been the case and once again went back inside the cabin to bed. I lay there extremely silent now, trying to listen for any little noise. And when I did this, I heard something I knew I did. It wasn't the sound of thumping or anything like that. I had to perk up my ears to really pay attention, and I figured out what I was hearing. It wasn't the sound of the wind outside or the water hitting the boat. It was the sound of someone breathing. It was not the sound of my breathing, but someone else's. It was coming from inside the cabin. Of course I panicked, but I tried to maintain composure so as not to make it obvious. I got out from the bed, walked outside the cabin, and locked myself in the cockpit. I intended on sailing until I could find a dock by the shore. There's a small window that looks into the cockpit from the cabin. It has a curtain. I turn to it every minute or so, at least once, to look back at it, expecting to see someone watching me. And one of the times I looked back, I did see someone. The curtain was curved up a little bit in the corner, and I saw someone's maybe a quarter of their face peeking into the cockpit. I turned away right away, acting like I didn't see them. I had the thought, what if it was my young son trying to scare me? But it wouldn't make sense. I saw him waving goodbye when I set sail from the house. It was 3 or 4 tense hours of hell, thinking at any moment someone could break into the cockpit and stab me. But I made it to shore and sailed through the narrow canal. I had already called the cops 15 minutes earlier, requesting they have a few officers waiting at the dock I was headed to. It was still dark out, but I saw people standing on the dock, and I couldn't have been more excited to get there. When I stopped the boat next to the dock, I came out from the cockpit screaming at the officers to help, pointing at the cabin door. The 2 officers went into the cabin with their hands on their pistols, and 10 seconds later, I heard them yelling at someone. They pulled out some guy with really long gray, wet hair, and a similar beard, wearing wet, skinny, ripped jeans and a gray t-shirt. They had him in cuffs as they walked him past me. He looked at me and just laughed, this insanely off-putting laugh. The guy looked and sounded like a meth head. A few months ago, I treated my girlfriend to a vacation in Amsterdam. We stayed at some hotel called Hotel Zephyr. My job allows me to work remotely from my laptop on my own hours. So at some points during our couple days there, I would sit in a lounge of the hotel by the Wi-Fi area to get my work done. My phone started to ring. It was my girlfriend calling me. As I picked up the phone, I went to the nearby room where the coffee was and poured myself a cup. My girlfriend was calling me from the room, talking about the things we should do that day. When I walked back to the lounge area where I left my laptop, I got a sickly feeling when I realized it wasn't there anymore. I went first thing to the lady at the front desk to ask her if she'd seen anyone leave the lounge area with a laptop. She apologized and said she hadn't seen anyone. I asked her to check the cameras, to which she responded with there not being any cameras in the lounge area, and that she was also non-controlled the footage that the cameras caught. She would have to get in contact with her manager, who was not working that day. She offered I submit a lost or stolen property form. I was absolutely disgusted with the service and planned on having a word with the manager the next day. I had no choice but to go back to our room and angrily vent to my girlfriend. She tried calming me down, saying there was nothing we could do about it, and that it was best we just go out and enjoy the vacation I was paying for. As angry as I was, I had to accept that she had a point. We both turned off notifications on our phones so we wouldn't be distracted, something we usually did on vacation. Then we went out and explored a great amount of the city, did a little bar hopping, then got back to our hotel late at night. It wasn't until we finally crashed into bed that I opened my phone to check for new emails and texts, and such, since I couldn't do that on my lap. Now, when I was going through my email, I realized every single email I'd received that day was opened. This included emails from work and a couple relatives. I started to panic because I knew how much delicate information I had in not just my email account, but my whole computer, which was signed in when I left it. I basically had all my personal information saved on that computer, including home address, phone numbers, personal pictures, passwords, credit card info, bank account info. I was a fool for leaving it unattended, even for a minute. I immediately changed all the passwords to my emails and other important accounts. That didn't matter for what was about to come, though. After opening my Messages app to check my texts since I hadn't been all day, I noticed text from an unknown number. It was a bunch of pictures that were saved on my computer. Personal pictures that I wouldn't ever want anyone to see. Then there were pictures I didn't remember taking, pictures of a hotel hallway and a hotel door. It was our hotel door. There's also a picture of me standing at the front desk talking to the lady about my missing laptop. It was taken from behind the glass door at the entrance of the hotel. Under all the pictures was a text saying, "I have all of your info, including your address and your current hotel room." This was sent using an untraceable phone number. Don't bother contacting the police. The rest of the message basically demanded I pay a certain amount of Bitcoin to a specific Bitcoin wallet address, or else. It literally said, or else. I'm not even fabricating this. I didn't know what else to do besides show my girlfriend the messages, as well as the embarrassing pictures. She started to panic more than me, and she honestly just made me even more tense. I left the room to go to the bathroom to think. He was asking for $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, but even if I paid that, I had no reassurance that this person wouldn't share those pictures or keep my laptop or do God knows whatever, or else meant. I decided I wouldn't pay the ransom. My girlfriend agreed with my decision. When I went back to bed, of course I was not tired at all anymore. Neither was my girlfriend. We sat up leaning on the headboard of the bed, talking, thinking, and worrying for a couple hours. Then there was a knock at the window of our hotel room. We both gasped. Well, my girlfriend more, so let out a short scream. I turned off the lamp so that whoever was out there couldn't see in. I also shut the shade completely. I didn't bother trying to look out there to see who it was. I assured my girlfriend we were safe, though she whispered we should call the cops or inform the front desk. I told her we would if the problem persisted, and then told her to go to sleep. Meanwhile, I stood in the middle of the room watching over her while also looking back at the window. I got a text. I looked at my phone and it said, "I'm looking into your room right now. I'm not playing games." Then there was another knock at the window. I decided to just grow a pair for a couple seconds and open a shade to see who was out there. I pulled the shade open. I couldn't see who it was, but there was someone standing on the other side of the glass looking in. My girlfriend screamed. I told her as I pulled it back shut. We packed our things and went to the front desk, telling the lady about the whole situation and requesting another room on one of the upper level floors. She said she would alert the authorities and gave us a room card to another room on the third floor. For the rest of the night, we slept close together. Well, I didn't sleep. I was awake all night waiting for a knock at the door. Morning came and the manager was in. So she took a look at the footage for the previous night. And of course, some guy with a baseball cap covering 90% of his face went into the lounge as soon as I left it to get coffee, then walked out with my laptop. There was only one camera that actually caught the man in the act. She said she would forward all video footage with that man over to the police. We were out of there. I blocked the number that was texting me. I had to accept defeat, but I didn't want to think about it anymore. There was nothing I could do about where those pictures would end up or some random person having my address. I canceled my credit cards and changed my passwords. There wasn't much else that Creep could do. However, what really motivated me to share this story with the internet was the fact that 3 days ago, I got a letter in the mail without a return address. It was addressed to me, and it was a short, straight-to-the-point note saying, "I hope you haven't forgotten. I have all of your information still." It was a horrible reminder that someone out there with bad intentions has not only my address, but my pictures, my phone number, and my name. There was a time a few months ago that my good friend Tina lost her phone on her best guy friend. So she hit me up on her sister's phone when she realized that whoever had her phone was reading her messages but not responding. I practically reprimanded her for not having a password on her phone. I suggested using Find My iPhone, but she didn't even have that enabled for whatever reason. I met up with her and decided to text her number. I sent a text saying, "Please return my friend's lost phone." Within seconds, it said the person read my text, but they didn't respond. So a minute later, I sent a more aggressive follow-up text. I said, "We can see that you're reading our messages. If you don't respond, we will brick the phone, track it, and it will be useless to you. Please return it now." The person read it right away and said, "Good luck." This infuriated me. I tried to respond, but apparently the person turned off the phone. There wasn't anything we could do now. She had Find My iPhone off, so we couldn't even report it as lost. I tried to make her feel better and took her out for dinner. When we got back to her house, a light upstairs was on and the garage door was open. "Are your parents home?" I asked her. "Maybe," she said, but they weren't supposed to be back from their trip until the next day. We went in through the garage door and she pressed the button to close it, and we went from the den to the living room and she called out for her parents. One of the doors upstairs shut. We could see and hear it. The way her house is arranged allows you to see some of the doors upstairs from the living room. The door wasn't shut forcefully, though. It shut quietly and softly. Tina looked at me, and I could see fear in her expression. I told her, "Wait there, I'd go upstairs and check." So I went slowly up the stairs, down the little walkway, got to the door, looked down at Tina one more time, then opened it. The room was dark. I looked for the light switch in the room, but couldn't find it. So I said to Tina, "Where's the light switch?" And she screamed, "Oh my God." She said that she had her address and the code to the garage saved on her phone. It took me a second to put together what she was implying, when just then someone grabbed my arm from inside the room and tried pulling me in. I screamed and tugged away from the grip. I started to slam the door over and over on the arm that was pulling at me, eventually getting them to let go. I heard grunting on the other side. I must have done some damage. I told Tina to run as I came down the stairs. The front door was only a few feet away, so we got out safely. We got into my car and I called the cops right away. We sat in front of the house in my car the whole time, making sure whether to know he left the house or not. Light upstairs turned on, and 5 seconds later, whoever it was walked to the window and just stood there for a while. Couldn't tell what he was looking at, nor could we see any facial features. But I did snap at least 10 pictures to show the police when they were to arrive. Then the guy just walked away from the window and the light shut off. Minutes later, 2 cop cars with their lights on came speeding down the road and stopped in front of the house. I showed them the pictures before they entered the house, and we waited in my car. The cops were in there a long time. They did a seriously thorough investigation of the house. They came back out to assure us it was safe to go back in. We thought for sure they would be able to track the phone now, that it was used as part of a crime, but to our surprise, they said there really wasn't anything they could do without Find My iPhone enabled or the phone actually being on for that matter. All they said we could and should do was change the code for the garage lock. I had to figure out how to do that for her. But still, after that I let Tina sleep in my house that night. When her parents got back the next day, she felt a lot safer. She got a new phone the next day, and we never pursued finding her stolen phone any further. March 8th, 2017, on a Friday night, me and 5 of my college buddies had a little night out. Not anything crazy, we just got dinner at some nice restaurant. Then we hit a dive bar in the same block. We got a few drinks, played darts, and within a couple hours we were out. It was until we left the bar that I realized my pockets were feeling kind of light. I checked both of my pockets and realized I didn't have my phone. I told my friends to wait as I ran back inside to look for it. I checked the seats at the bar, the area by the dartboard. I even asked the bartender. He hadn't seen it though. A couple of my friends came in, and I asked one of them to call my number, but quickly realized that was kind of pointless in a loud, crowded bar. I asked the bartender to please call my number if my phone were to turn up. Sadly, I knew that was wishful thinking. We traced back to the restaurant to check the table we sat at, and I asked the staff if they had any missing phones. So it was safe to assume my phone was taken by someone. I was a bit pissed, but I still had a good time and was trying not to let it ruin my night. I borrowed one of my friend's phones to sign into my iCloud on the Find My app, and I saw my phone's location was still showing, so at the very least, the person who took it hadn't turned it off yet. The location was just a block away, so we rushed in that direction and narrowed it down to this one building. It seemed to be a 2-story house divided into apartments. There were 3 doorbells. None had labels on them. We stood there, debating what to do. I said screw it, and started pressing each doorbell. One by one, someone answered the third one. A man's voice said hello. I asked him politely if he had by chance found a phone. He said no and hung up. We sat in my friend's car, parked across the street, refreshing the location every minute. My phones hadn't moved. It was still in that house. After a while, the dot finally started to move again. It was going down the block. We drove and followed it slowly until the dot stopped in front of a building that looked like some kind of old convenience store that had been turned into apartments. This time, there were 5 different bells. Again, no labels. I hesitated this time. Didn't want to keep bothering random people at night. But then I saw the dot was getting closer again. That's when I saw someone walking down the sidewalk, hood up, face down. I got out of the car and followed them from a distance, watching the dot on the app, and it was definitely moving in sync with this person. I jogged to catch up and called out, "Hey." They didn't turn around, so I ran and got in front of them. It was a guy, maybe mid-30s, looked startled when I stopped him. I asked him straight up if he had my phone. He denied it. I told him I tracked it to him, showed him the app. He started to get angry and kept denying it, but then I told him we were calling the police. He suddenly pulled the phone out of his jacket and handed it to me, muttering something like he found it on the sidewalk. He walked off fast. I was just glad to have my phone back. But when I unlocked it, I noticed a couple things were off. There were weird pictures in my camera roll. Pictures of my friends at the bar, taken from behind. Pictures of me walking back into the bar. And one picture of my driver's license, which had been in my wallet, not my phone. I checked my wallet in a panic and realized my license was gone. To this day, I don't know how he got it. Maybe he pickpocketed me more than just the phone. I froze my credit and got a new license. But I still wonder what he planned to do with that photo, and if he took more of my info than I realized. I used to work as a construction worker and engineer in the Fairport area in my early 20s. My coworkers and I would do basic work like constructing add-ons to already standing structures like adding basements to buildings. One of our jobs in 2017 was to construct a small basement area and extend the main floor for a corner dentist building. The basement was to have a bathroom and 2 big storage areas. We were making serious progress by the time of the story. We had working lights in the basement already. The basement had just been sealed off, so there was no longer a big hole in the ground. And since the lights were working down there, we had a source of light while we worked down there at night. One of my coworkers, Marcus, went upstairs and then outside to help with work on the add-on section outside. I was tinkering with the electrical components a bit. I was no electrician, but I had a basic understanding of what I was doing. But suddenly the power went out. I knew it had nothing to do with what I was doing. I figured there must have been a power outage in the vicinity. The 4 of us didn't keep our phones on us due to the nature of our jobs, plus how dirty our hands would get. We all kept them in our jackets that we hung upstairs. But luckily, one of the tools we kept in our vests were flashlights. Before I could even reach and grab for my flashlight, though, I started to hear a rattling noise. The closest way I could come to describing it was a bag of coins being shaken. Not exactly, but close enough. It seemed to come from inside the tiny, soon-to-be bathroom. I took the flashlight out from the pouch on my vest, turned it on, and aimed it towards the bathroom section. We had already put up a door, and it was slightly closed, covering my view from the actual room itself. It didn't sound like any kind of infrastructural sound, so I had to imagine it was one of my coworkers. I went to the door, and as I wrapped my hand around the side of the door, I waited a second before pulling it open, just because I needed to gather my bearings. But when I did swing open that door, my flashlight revealed some person dressed in all black, standing face in the corner of the tiny room so that I couldn't see their face. That is until the person turned their head, like a deer reacting to a sound in the woods. All I saw through the flashlight was the glow in their eyes. I slammed the door shut and ran up the stairs in my heavy boots, looking for my coworkers. They were all outside, apparently about ready to pack up and call a night since the power and all the nearby buildings had gone out. I counted 3 of my coworkers, so it couldn't have been any of them in that tiny room. I asked all of them if anybody else who worked in that building had been there at all that night. They all shook their heads no. So at this point, I had to lead them downstairs to show them the creepy stranger in the basement. They followed me to the basement and to the tiny room, and as I feared would happen, that person I saw wasn't in there anymore, or in the entire basement for that matter. I was obviously embarrassed when they didn't believe me, but I wasn't going to hold them hostage and make them believe me. So we all went back outside and packed up. I was the one with the key to the building, so I had to lock up when everyone left. After getting into my car and seeing the others drive off, I can't describe it, but I got a feeling inside of me that made me want to go back down into that basement and check one more time for that person I was sure that I saw. I took a deep breath, got out, unlocked the door to the building, and went back down to the basement. The power was still out, so I walked down the stairs with 2 flashlights on, the one I was using before and now my phone as well. I made it to the bottom step and then stopped. The dead silence in this cramped, unfinished basement, mixed with the fact that I was anticipating a sound, freaked me out to the point that I was about to turn around and go back upstairs. When suddenly I heard the rattling again, coming from the tiny room again. I didn't even look, but when I heard it, I felt my heart in my throat and I stormed up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut again. I locked the door to the building and drove home. Thank God it was a Saturday, so I wouldn't have to be back until Monday. I made sure not to work in that basement alone anymore. However, and thankfully, we finished the work within a couple weeks, and nothing else really strange ever happened. It was a normal night in the cold month of November. My wife and I were watching a late-night movie in our room in bed before going to sleep. At some point in the movie, the TV suddenly shut off and the room went dark. My wife and I let out simultaneous grunts in annoyance. The lamps, clocks, everything went out, so the power must have gone out. I told my wife I'd go outside and check if the neighbors lost power too. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the stoop for only a second or two because it was freezing outside, but I could see lights on in the neighbors' houses, so it seemed to be just us who lost power. We have the fuse box in a small boiler-type room in our basement. It seemed unlikely it could have anything to do with that, but I had to give it a shot. I had no idea what else I could do. I went downstairs with a flashlight. One weird thing about our house is you have to walk down the stairs to get to the basement door. Like the door is literally on the basement level. I was tired, so I kind of slowly and lazily stomped down the steps. Well, I got to the basement door at the bottom. I turned the doorknob and tried opening the door. It wouldn't push open though. I tried a little harder, but it still wouldn't budge. My wife must have locked it. I went all the way back upstairs to ask my wife where she put the basement key. She got out of bed and said she'd get it for me. I followed her downstairs to the kitchen where we had a key hanger. She flipped around the many keys until she pulled off the basement key and handed it to me. She then went back upstairs to the bedroom while I went back down the stairs to the basement door. I put the key in the lock and turned it to the right then tried opening the door again, but it still wouldn't open. I went back up the stairs and called for my wife to come down. When she did, I asked for help like a child, since she was the only one to ever lock this door. She came down the stairs with a flashlight, making fun of me for not being able to use a wooden door, and before she even tried using the key, she turned the doorknob and gave one good push, and the door creaked open. I was dumbfounded. I swore up and down the door wouldn't open. Then I joked that I loosened it up for her. Once again, she went upstairs to the bedroom. I entered the basement, flicking the light switch on, which only led to more darkness. Flashlight still in hand, I went to the boiler room. When I got inside of there, I tinkered with all the switches, flipping them from one side to the other, until finally the lights in the basement flicked on. I was relieved. I shut the tiny door to the fuse box. Just then, however, there was a sound from outside of the boiler room. The sound of one of the basement closet doors creaking. I took a peek outside at both of the doors. One was closed, the other was slightly cracked open. My heart started beating faster as I went over to the door. I stood about 2 feet away from that door, listening. For some reason, it took until then for me to think, why? How would the switch in our fuse box for power be switched off all of a sudden? Then I started to think, what if the basement door was never locked? What if someone was simply pulling it shut? After a few moments of silence, I heard a deep exhale in the closet. I took off for the stairs, this time making sure to lock the door behind me. I never run up a flight of stairs so quickly in my life. I ran to our bedroom and yelled in distress to my wife. I was not acting like the man of the house at all, I'll admit. I was too afraid. I did call the police, though. At some point after the phone call, before the police arrived, we heard the sound of glass breaking outside. I looked out my window, but it was too dark to see anything in the backyard. When the police arrived, I led them quickly to the basement, but by then the closet door was completely open and it was empty. We also noticed shattered glass in one corner of the basement and things knocked all over the floor. Whoever was in the closet managed to climb up a ledge where we keep collectibles, smashed the window, and climbed up out of the basement to the outside. In other words, they escaped and were never caught. That night we kept the basement and living room lights on all night and locked every door in the house. The next day, we had the glass fixed. We don't even live in a bad neighborhood, so it's really scary to think that something like this could happen to basically anyone. I work as a janitor at a commuter college campus I won't disclose for my own privacy and safety. My job entails cleaning the hallways, classrooms, and bathrooms of varying buildings on campus. Usually, I work later hours in the day, like 1 to 9 o'clock, when the campus is less crowded. There was a stormy night in the summer that I was working. The college offers summer courses, obviously, so yes, I work in the summer too. This was during one of the biggest storms we'd had that year. Extreme winds mixed with a torrential downpour. It was later in my shift, anywhere from 7 to 8 o'clock. I was currently in the event center hall, which didn't hold any classes, just a big ballroom, a small theater, and varying classroom-type rooms used for general purposes. It was usually one of the quieter buildings on campus, apart from when events were being held in it. I very well may have been the only person in that building at that hour. I was cleaning in the downstairs section of the building. It shelved the game room, when suddenly the whole place went dark, like pitch black, except for the red glow of an exit sign near the doorway to the stairs. The power shortly went out. I took out my phone and called one of the other janitors who was working in another building. He told me that power went out in his building too, which meant the whole campus probably lost power due to the storm. After hanging up, I figured my job down there was done, so I followed the glow of the exit sign, but nearly crapped myself when I saw someone peering their head from around the stairway. I called out, thinking it was maybe someone who worked in the building, but before I could even really say anything, they disappeared upstairs. I ran to the stairway to try and follow, given that I would have to most likely lock up the building now, and had to make sure everyone was outside. Quite frankly, when I got upstairs, I didn't know what to do in the total darkness. There were very few backup lights that were still lit in case of blackouts, and they were very, very dim, only lighting up basically a little around their immediate surroundings. I started calling out in the dark, seemingly empty building that I had to close up. Everyone and anyone must get out. The hallway in this building did one big circle around the big ballroom, and backup lights were distributed throughout the hallway. However, like I said, they were far between and extremely dim. I started doing my round through the hallway, and I was pretty sure I heard footsteps behind me. I turned when I was under one of the backup lights, but I didn't see anything behind me. I continued around the hallway, checking each room. When I checked the last bathroom and found no one, I figured the building was empty and safe to lock up. Walking to the front of the building, I heard footsteps again. This time I knew someone had to be behind me. I turned and saw a silhouette standing in the dark just beyond one of the dim lights. I called out, "You need to get out, the building's closing." They didn't move. They didn't even flinch. They just stood there, slightly hunched, hands to their sides. I stepped slightly closer, only to realize the backup light was now dimming even more, making it harder to see. I backed up slowly, not turning my back to the silhouette until I got to the door. I unlocked the door, stepped outside into the rain, and locked the door behind me. I wasn't about to investigate that. No shot. I called campus security and told them I thought someone was still inside the building. Whether they checked or not, I don't know. But I wasn't going back inside. Never worked in that building alone again. My partner and I got a breaking and entering call late one Friday night. I never responded to a call like that before, but it sounded serious. A young woman was home alone and heard footsteps downstairs, but when she was on the 911 call, the call was cut before she could give her location in the house. We arrived at the home and entered through the front door, which was left unlocked, which later proved to be how the break-in occurred. Both of us shouted, "Police," with our guns drawn, expecting the suspect to be armed. We called out for Carly. That was the homeowner's name. Carly never called back to us. We knew she must have been scared and didn't want to give away her position to the intruder. We checked the whole first floor, which was small and quick. There didn't appear to be a basement. A door shutting upstairs drew my partner and I's attention. I led the way upstairs. All the doors had been shut, so I couldn't really tell which door I had just heard. I told my partner to check that one while I checked this one. I turned the doorknob and kicked the door open, immediately lifting my gun into the air. It was a dark, empty room. I heard breathing in this room, though it sounded like a woman's breathing. I looked at the closet door, which was slid slightly open, and I saw half a face, mostly someone's eye peeking through the opening. Resting assured it was Carly, I lowered my gun and said, "Carly, it's okay. You can come out." She didn't, and the breathing quieted. Then my partner in the next room over called, "Mason, I found her." My feeling in that room suddenly went from at ease to ready to throw up. I raised my gun again and yelled, "Come out of the closet." They did not obey, so I called my partner into the room. He turned on the light, and we opened the closet together to see this disheveled, drugged-out woman holding one of Carly's kitchen knives. With two guns pointed at her, she dropped the knife, and we brought her into the precinct. Thank God I was stationed in a safer area of town the next year, and I haven't gotten any breaking and entering calls since then. As a state trooper for 15 years, I've experienced my share of close calls and uncomfortable situations. This happened over a decade ago when I was still relatively new to the job. I was on night patrol on an interstate about 2:30 a.m. I usually had my car parked near a bush to hide myself from view from oncoming speeding cars, but at this hour, I didn't really try to hide too much. I was moving my car and pulled into a gas station that sat on the side of the interstate. It was closed, not because it was late, but rather it was temporarily out of service. I noticed two cars parked in the lot next to each other. There was nothing immediately suspicious about this, but I kept my eye out just because strange things happened at this hour. I parked my car in a way that I could watch the interstate as well as these two parked cars. I realized that I didn't see anyone in either of those cars, though. Now, this was quite suspicious. The station was closed, and there were no workers here. I exited my car with my hands on my belt and approached the two cars. I tapped on the windows for both of them. Nobody in either of them, as I suspected. I began to walk around the lot as the occasional car zipped on the interstate. I went up to the glass of the closed gas station and knocked on it. I turned around, dumbfounded. Whose cars were these? Just as I imagined they could be in the woods somewhere, I heard someone running from around the building and asked for my help. He was some young 20-something-year-old man like me at the time. He said his car wouldn't start and needed help now. I told him right away that I was no mechanic and that he'd need to call a towing company, but he practically begged me to just check under the hood for a second. He ran to his driver's side and popped the hood. I looked under the hood with him, not really knowing what to look for because I wasn't much of a car guy at the time. I asked if his battery died. I looked at him. I took note that he was looking around very oddly. He replied, "I don't think so." I then looked at the car parked next to him. "Whose car is that?" I asked him. He said he didn't know. He simply parked there to see if there was a porta potty in the back or something. I was reading through this kid's bullshit. Something was up here. As I looked back at the guy from the two cars, I saw him looking back at something or someone. I turned and saw another guy approaching me with a knife in his hand. I unholstered my gun and aimed it at him. He dropped the knife and put his hands up. They both did. I immediately called for backup. While keeping the two at gunpoint, I cuffed the one who was holding the knife and placed him in the back of my car, then grabbed the second pair from my glove box and cuffed the second guy. When backup arrived, I went to the back of the gas station where the first guy had originally approached me from. While I found there still holds up to be the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen in all of my years as a trooper. There were two fresh dead bodies wrapped in garbage bags, cut up into pieces to fit in the bags. Along with them was also a shovel sitting on the concrete by the woods. The two were planning on burying the body somewhere in the woods off the interstate, and it seemed they were in a hurry. These two were a couple of the dumbest people I had ever interacted with, being that out of anywhere in the state, they chose to bury two bodies off an interstate behind a gas station. Going to sleep at night, knowing you almost had your throat slit by somebody on the job messes with you. And I didn't get much sleep for a while. I'm a rookie cop currently working the night shift. I'm just a normal patrol officer, conducting traffic stops and responding to basic 911 calls. 2 nights in a row last week, I was called to the same house. Dispatch had called me to check out the house as someone had dialed 911 and hung up. The house was a couple miles from me in my patrol zone. I arrived to the house quickly and turned up the dirt driveway through the trees onto the property. The house was dark. No lights on, no cars, nothing. I parked my squad car on the far right side of the property and went to the front door, taking note that all the windows were properly shut. I knocked on the door and got no answer. The door was also locked. From my immediate guess, the place was abandoned for years by the looks of it. I called the dispatch that the place was abandoned and nobody was there. Then I left. The next night I was working the same shift and around a similar time, I got a call from dispatch that there was another 911 call from the same house. Only this time, someone could be heard crying on the other end before the call ended. I was asked to check out the house again. This time I was a little further away, but still the drive wasn't too bad. I pulled up the dirt driveway again onto the property, and again, no lights, no cars. I approached the front door again, and this time it was left cracked open. I knocked on the door while holding the doorknob to prevent the door from pushing open. No answer. I called the dispatch that I would be entering the house. which I was cleared to do since the crying over the line implied an urgent situation inside the house. I drew my gun and entered the house. I tried to find a light switch, without luck. I had my gun in one hand and now my flashlight in the other. The house was mostly silent, besides this sound coming from behind a closed door, the basement door. I called the dispatch for backup and whispered. The sound coming from down in that basement was a tone, like a dial tone of a phone. I started walking down the stairs as quietly as possible. I got to the bottom and followed the noise of the dial tone to an old, early 2000-style landline speakerphone. The phone was off the hook and it was playing the dial tone on speakerphone. I put the phone on the hook to silence the noise, and it was almost as if it were planned to happen like this. As soon as the phone hit the hook, I heard a muzzled, laughing-type noise in the far corner of the basement. I turned around, and there was some guy standing opposite me in the basement with his hand over his mouth, and he appeared to be laughing. But it wasn't this genuine laugh. It was more like a sickly, mentally unstable laugh. The guy was holding something in his other hand. I couldn't see what it was at first. When he raised his hand up to his head, I realized he was holding a revolver. I aimed my gun at him and yelled to drop the weapon. He paused as he had his revolver to his head, apparently about to pull the trigger. So I shot him in the arm twice, causing him to drop the gun. He screamed in pain as I cuffed him and brought him upstairs. I requested a medical team at once. A second squad car pulled up, as did an ambulance a few minutes later. The scariest part about this for me was not that I had to shoot a man in the arm twice, that I was mere seconds away from seeing a man spray his brains out onto the wall. Before getting transferred to a different county, I used to work as a police officer in Eastbrook, Pennsylvania. Eastbrook is not a safe place. They say that crime there is 88% higher than the rest of the state. Having worked there for a year, I got to learn that firsthand. There would be a lot of break-ins, robberies, assaults, and after a while, you get used to those calls. Sometimes, you get pretty strange, unsettling calls, though. This was one of them. Most Eastbrook locals are familiar with the Blackwood Estate, a long-abandoned mansion that sits right on the Marion River. The home was constructed in 1893 to serve as a residence for Elliot M. Blackwood, as well as his wife and 4 daughters. The house had been abandoned and left in decay since 1976 and is now owned by the county. Sometimes there would be kids trespassing on the property to check it out. Past midnight, I was told over the radio by dispatch to investigate the property, as there was a report by a neighboring house that there were some people seen hopping the fence to the property. Upon entering the property, I noticed a light coming from inside one of the upstairs windows. Part of me inside died a little as I realized someone was in there. That was my job to go in and get them out. I requested backup into my radio and stated I would be entering the mansion. I pushed open the front door, which was already slightly ajar. The inside of the mansion smelled like rot and moisture. I used my flashlight to navigate the interior. It looked like a stereotypical haunted house. Broken wooden floors, torn wallpaper, graffiti, old dusty furniture. I made my way up the stairs where I saw the light coming from. The second floor was even more decayed. I could hear very soft, slow, creaking footsteps somewhere up ahead. I paused and radioed for an update on my backup. I slowly crept down the hallway and heard a door shut. I followed the sound and stopped in front of a room with light shining underneath the door. I knocked and announced myself as law enforcement. No answer. I opened the door with my gun drawn. There was no one inside. There was only a lit lantern on the floor in the center of the room. The wallpaper in this room was covered in writings, mostly incoherent, but one phrase stood out, repeated in red ink over and over again. The river is calling. Then I heard something down the hall, a loud thud followed by what sounded like footsteps running down the stairs. I chased after the noise, racing down the hallway and staircase with my light bouncing. I didn't see anyone, but the front door was now wide open. I radioed in that the suspect had fled the mansion. When backup arrived, we searched the property and surrounding area. No one was found. We left the mansion and contacted the county. They locked the gate and posted additional security signs. To this day, I wonder what exactly I walked in on that night. Who was in that room? What did "the river is calling" mean? And why did it feel like the house itself didn't want me there?